Picture this. Rome, 67 AD. Nero strides through the forum in shimmering robes, the crowd parting around him like waves. At his side walks a veiled figure draped in silks, heavy with jewels, every movement graceful. The people whisper. Some call her empress, some call her a goddess, but the truth spreads faster than incense smoke. She was once a boy named Sporus. This is not a love story. It is how power turns grief into control, how obsession twists into violence, and how one emperor forced the world to applaud his delusion. And if you're drawn to stories history tried to bury, hit subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Because to understand how Rome reached this grotesque moment, how a boy was remade into a dead woman, we first have to look at Nero's rise. Nero's golden beginning. First, forget the monster for a moment. Before the cruelty, before the flames, Nero was Rome's golden boy. He wasn't born to rule. In 37 AD, Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus came into the world fatherless, his future uncertain. His mother, Agrippina, clawed her way back into Rome's cutthroat politics. She maneuvered her son into position until Emperor Claudius adopted him. With a new name, Nero Claudius, Caesar the boy stepped onto the path of empire. At 16, Nero inherited the throne. Rome braced for tyranny. Instead, the young emperor seemed merciful. He cut unfair taxes, curbed corruption, and poured money into games and public festivals. The Circus Maximus thundered with chariot races. Gladiators fought under the sun, and Nero won the crowd's love. Even the Senate enjoyed new freedom, as he let them speak without fear. But Nero's heart was never in politics. What he craved was art. He sang, played the lyre, and wrote poetry. At first the elite sneered, but the people adored him. Their emperor performed on stage like any other entertainer. It shocked Rome, but it also set him apart. He wasn't just a ruler, he was an artist who demanded applause. For a while, everything glittered. Statues of Nero rose across the city, coins bore his young face. His voice echoed through Rome like a promise of something new. But ambition has cracks. Behind the glow, his mother Agrippina still pulled strings, demanding influence. Nero resented her control. Their arguments grew sharper, their bond poisoned by power, and the Senate, once charmed, began to whisper. Nero's endless performances, his obsession with the stage, hinted at a hunger that could never be satisfied. The people kept cheering, blind to the tension. As long as the bread flowed and the games dazzled, Rome forgave the signs of excess. But the palace was restless. The Senate muttered. Agrippina schemed. Nero's hunger for love and validation grew stronger than reason. It is here that his story begins to turn. Power cannot stay golden forever. The young emperor who once charmed the empire would soon reveal his shadow. And at the center of that shadow stood a woman who would consume him, Poppaea Sabina. Then came Poppaea Sabina. She was unlike any woman Nero had known, striking, ambitious, dangerous. Pale skin, golden hair perfumed with myrrh, a presence sharp enough to cut through the crowded court. Poppaea had already been married twice, most recently to Otho, a man of charm and ambition, but her sights were set higher. She wanted not a husband, she wanted a throne. Nero was already married to Octavia, the daughter of Claudius. Octavia was dutiful, silent, and politically perfect. But to Nero she was cold stone, an obligation, not a passion. Poppaea was fire. She laughed at his poetry, praised his music, and whispered that his genius deserved worship, not mockery. Where others dismissed him as an emperor playing actor, Poppaea told him he was destined for greatness. Nero fell hard. He showered her with villas on the Bay of Naples, with jewels and silks, with every luxury Rome could provide. Poppaea took it all and then demanded more. She whispered that Octavia was barren, that Nero deserved heirs, that he deserved a wife equal to his brilliance. Her words were poison, sweet, and convincing. The palace grew tense. Octavia remained silent, her presence both shield and threat. Poppaea hated her. Nero began to dream of ridding himself of the wife who gave him nothing, of crowning the woman who fueled his obsession. But obsession is never still. The more Nero gave, the more he feared losing her. Her beauty became a weapon against him. If she could entrance him, could she not enchant others? He began to cling tighter, his love souring into possession. The court whispered. Senators muttered that Poppaea's influence was dangerous, that she had bewitched the emperor, but none dared challenge her openly. To cross Poppaea was to cross Nero, and Nero's temper was as infamous as his passion. The empire watched, scandalized. Nero's infatuation with her was clear, his distance from Octavia even clearer. He would spend hours with Poppaea, indulging her every whim, listening to her every demand. Octavia became a ghost in her own palace, and yet the more Nero clung, the more fragile his control became. Love mixed with paranoia, devotion fused with fear. Poppaea's ambitions only sharpened his hunger, and his hunger made him volatile. It could not hold. Obsession always demands a breaking point, and soon Poppaea would discover that Nero's love was not only dangerous, it was deadly. What changed in 65 AD was not politics or war. It was a quarrel inside the palace, and it ended in blood. By then, Poppaea had everything she wanted. She wore the title of empress, draped in silks and crowned with Rome's wealth. To the public, she was divine, gliding through ceremonies with grace. But inside Nero's palace, life was never secure. His moods turned with the wind, his love burned as hot as his rage, and when that rage found her, no crown could protect her. The fight began, sources say, over something small. Perhaps she reproached him for staying too long at the theatre. Perhaps she demanded he curb his indulgence. Others claim it was her ambition, her constant pressure for him to tighten his hold on Rome. Whatever the spark, the fire spread fast. Picture the scene. Voices echo off marble walls. Nero shouts, fists clenched, veins visible in his neck. Poppaea, pregnant with his child, refuses to shrink. She was not Octavia silent, compliant, safe. She met his fury with her own, daring to challenge an emperor in his own house. And then it happened. Ancient writers disagree on the details. Some say he kicked her in the abdomen. Others say he struck her in blind fury. The truth is blurred by rumour, but the result was certain. Poppaea crumpled to the ground, her life and the life of their unborn child extinguished in an instant. Silence fell heavy as stone. The emperor who had loved her beyond reason now stared at the ruin of his own hands. Her golden hair spread across the marble like a broken crown. Nero was inconsolable. He ordered a funeral fit for a goddess incense burning in pillars of smoke, spices embalming her body, statues raised in her likeness. To Rome, it looked like devotion. To those who knew, it reeked of guilt. But grief did not heal him. It twisted him further. He could not let go. Poppaea's absence became an obsession that gnawed at him. He began to search for her shadow, her reflection, her ghost in other faces. The Senate whispered of his instability. The people began to murmur of cruelty, but no one dared confront him. How do you reason with a man who killed the woman he adored, and yet still worshipped her memory as though she lived? This was the fracture. Nero's golden beginning was shattered. His grief would not fade, it would drive him deeper into delusion, and soon he would find a replacement. In the halls of the palace walked a boy with delicate features, soft eyes, and a dangerous resemblance to the woman Nero had destroyed. After Poppaea's death, Rome moved on. The empire always did. Rebellions flared, senators schemed, games resumed. But inside the palace, Nero's grief rotted into something darker. He could not let her go. He searched for her face in the crowd, her voice in echoes, her presence in shadows. And then he saw Sporus. He was young, barely more than a boy, born a slave, trained to serve, freed but still bound to the palace system. He had been taught obedience, taught silence, taught that survival meant never saying no. His life should have been invisible. But his appearance betrayed him. Sporus had delicate features. His skin was pale, his movements graceful, his face soft in ways that recalled Poppaea. To others, it was coincidence. To Nero, it was revelation. Here was her shadow. Here was the chance to undo loss. The summons came. Sporus was brought closer to the emperor, called to serve not as a boy but as a reflection. Imagine the dread of that gaze, an emperor who looked at you and did not see you at all. He saw only her. Every glance weighed against memory, every silence filled with expectation. Whispers spread through the palace. Sporus was seen at Nero's side, seated near him at banquets, drawn into private chambers. Courtiers understood what this meant, but none dared speak aloud the truth. To mock the emperor's obsession was to invite death, so they smiled and bowed, and the charade deepened. For Sporus, there was no escape. He could not refuse. He could not run. He was trapped in Nero's grief, caught in a fantasy he had not chosen, and slowly the horror became clear. Nero wanted more than resemblance. He wanted transformation. But there was one obstacle. Sporus was not Poppaea. He was not a woman. He was a boy. And Nero's will did not tolerate obstacles. The emperor summoned physicians. Instruments were prepared. Plans whispered in guarded rooms hardened into orders. Sporus's body would be altered, cut, remade. Nero would not let nature dictate reality. His obsession would carve the world into his vision, no matter the cost. Imagine knowing what was coming, the corridors buzzing with rumour, servants avoiding your eyes, the weight of inevitability pressing in from every side. Sporus had no power, no voice, no protection. He was a boy standing on the edge of annihilation. This was not love. It was not devotion. It was power consuming a life, bending it until it broke. Sporus was about to be unmade, not just in flesh but in identity. The knives were waiting. The order was given. Sporus would be cut. Castration was not unknown in Rome. Singers were altered to preserve their voices, servants reshaped to fit palace roles. But this was different. This was not preservation. This was creation, a boy forced into the image of a dead empress. The chamber waited. Oil lamps smoked against the walls. Bronze and iron instruments gleamed, their edges crude, their purpose final. There would be no anesthesia, no mercy, only pain and obedience. Sporus was restrained. The first cut ripped into flesh, and the air filled with screams. Blood pooled across the stone, the smell of burned skin rising as hot iron sealed the wound. Physicians worked quickly, their hands steady, their faces blank. By the end, the boy who entered the chamber no longer existed. He survived, but survival was not freedom. From that day on, his body belonged to Nero's fantasy. Silk draped over his frame. Kohl rimmed his eyes. Rouge marked his cheeks. Perfume clung to his skin. Servants drilled him in the movements of Poppaea, the tilt of her head, the softness of her voice, the grace of her walk. He was not allowed to be Sporus. He was ordered to become her. Imagine the torment, waking each morning to find your reflection smothered beneath paint and fabric. To walk the palace halls and hear people call you not by your name but hers. Every gesture rehearsed. Every smile forced. Every moment a reminder that you had been buried alive inside someone else's identity. Nero paraded him like a prize. Courtiers bowed, senators applauded, none dared laugh, though many wanted to. The emperor had willed a boy into an empress, and Rome was forced to pretend it was real. Power demanded obedience, and so the charade became truth. But Nero wanted more. It wasn't enough to keep Sporus in the shadows, dressed as Poppaea in private chambers. He wanted the world to see. He wanted Rome to accept this illusion as fact, to cheer it, to sanctify it. The emperor would stage a wedding. The invitations were not requests, they were commands. Senators, generals, and nobles were ordered to attend. None dared refuse. The courtyard was dressed for splendour. Flowers carpeted the ground, torches blazed against the night. Musicians plucked trembling notes, their eyes fixed on the floor. Rome had seen many weddings, but never one like this. At the centre stood Sporus. Draped in purple silk, veiled in gold, he looked every inch the bride. But his beauty was a mask, his silence a prison. The rouge on his cheeks, the jewels on his throat, these were chains, not ornaments. Then came Nero. Resplendent in ceremonial robes, he led Sporus to the altar with a smile of triumph. Vows were spoken, rings exchanged, priests chanted in trembling voices, and with that, the emperor declared a boy to be his empress. The crowd applauded on command. Faces stiff with fear betrayed no laughter, no revulsion. To question this union was to question Nero. So, Rome clapped, and the nightmare was sealed as law. Afterward, a feast sprawled across marble tables. Roasted boar, honeyed fruits, fountains flowing with wine. Nero sang for his guests, demanding their applause, while Sporus sat beside him in silence, the perfect empress, the perfect illusion. From that day forward, Sporus lived not as himself, but as Poppaea reborn. He attended ceremonies, banquets, and public functions. He walked the streets of Rome, veiled and adorned, his presence forced into memory's mould. Every appearance declared the same message. Nero had conquered death itself, but behind the spectacle lay the truth. This was not resurrection, it was erasure. The boy had been stripped of his voice, his body, his name. Rome's elite, who once whispered of scandal, now bowed to the delusion. Power demanded the illusion, and so they obeyed. Sporus endured it all in silence. Every step in silk, every toast in gold, was another reminder that he no longer belonged to himself. He was a living shadow, a ghost paraded for an emperor's obsession. But empires, like illusions, do not last. Nero's stage was collapsing, his grip slipping, his enemies gathering. The emperor who once reshaped reality would soon be unable to shape his own fate. And when Nero fell, Sporus's torment did not end. It only changed hands. Rome had grown tired of Nero's theatre. For years, he had ruled like an actor, chasing applause, lavish games, endless music, costly performances, but in the end, the audience walked out. By 68 AD, rebellion spread through the empire. Galba rose in Spain, Vindex declared revolt in Gaul. Legions once loyal turned against him. The Senate, long humiliated, finally moved to break him. Even the Praetorian Guard, bought with bribes, abandoned his side. The emperor who once seemed untouchable found himself alone. Nero fled the palace in disguise, his golden robes traded for rags. He begged for loyalty, but no one answered. In a villa outside the city, trembling, he held a dagger to his throat yet lacked the courage to finish. A freedman forced the blade through, and the last words he gasped were, "What an artist dies in me." The curtain fell. But for Sporus, the nightmare continued. With Nero gone, he was not freed. He became a trophy. First claimed by Otho, who had once been Poppeia's husband, Sporus was taken into his household. Some whispered it was revenge Otho taking what Nero had warped. Others thought it was desire, twisted by the memory of the woman they both lost. To Sporus, it was chains all over again, but Otho's rule lasted only months. When he fell, Sporus passed to Vitellius, a man known for cruelty and appetite. And here, the story reached its darkest turn. Vitellius devised a performance for the people of Rome. Sporus would play the goddess Proserpina in a public ritual, a reenactment of her rape and abduction. Before the eyes of the city, the boy forced into an empress's robes would be violated, mocked, displayed as theatre. Sporus saw the plan clearly. He had survived the knife, he had survived the silks, the wedding, the charade of being Poppaea. But this final humiliation he would not endure. Faced with the choice between public violation and death, Sporus chose death. His story ended not with freedom, not with peace, but with silence. A life erased by power, swallowed by obsession, extinguished before it had truly begun. And yet his name survives. Sporus appears in the margins of Roman history, remembered not for his voice, his choices, or his dreams, but for what was done to him. He is the boy cut into a bride, the child paraded as a ghost, the victim of an emperor's grief sharpened into cruelty. Rome wanted to forget him. Instead, he lingers as a haunting reminder. His story forces questions. What does it mean to erase someone, to strip away not only their body but their self? What does it reveal about power, when obsession can bend flesh, identity, and truth itself? Nero believed he had resurrected Poppaea. What he created instead was a monument to destruction. Sporus was not Poppaea. He was never allowed to be Sporus. He was made into nothing, hollowed by another man's will. And still, across centuries, his ghost speaks. Every retelling gives back a fragment of what was stolen. Every time his name is remembered, he resists the silence Rome tried to bury him in. So when we picture Nero, the tyrant who sang as Rome burned, who kicked his wife to death, who married a boy cut into her image, we should also picture Sporus, not as the empress he was forced to become, but as the boy he was never allowed to remain. Rome liked to boast of its eternity, but its cruelty was also eternal, and Sporus stands as proof, because history is not only triumphal arches and marble columns, it is also screams in darkened chambers, silks that weigh heavier than chains, and voices stolen before they can speak. Sporus's life may have been consumed, but his story endures, a warning, a shadow, a ghost of Rome. And if his tragedy unsettles you, if it forces you to see the past differently, then stay with me. There are more forgotten voices, more hidden stories, more ghosts waiting in the dark. Rome's stage is filled with them.